Welcome to Badass Lady Folk. I'm your host, Christine Stoddard. This episode, my guests are Karla Jackson Brewer and Tara Bracco. Welcome!
Hi.
I'm so happy to have you. So you are representing the organization...
Poetic People Power.
Yeah, PPP.
Yes,
I love it.
P3. We say
P3.
for short. Yeah.
So tell me about starting this organization. What was the impetus? And then I would love to know how you two met and came together and started making poetry together.
Sure. I came to New York to study theater for college, and when I got out of school, I decided I didn't want to be an actress. I was really feeling, especially in the late 90s, I felt like there weren't enough good parts for women, and I really wanted to figure out a way to have my own voice. And I was doing some poetry at that time, and I went on a cross-country poetry tour. I self-funded a tour, and I went across the country, and I just read my poetry at open mic nights, and I was really getting a sense of the many variety of voices that were in the scene. But largely at that time, it was very much split between slam poetry and the literary poetry world. And I thought there's so much more richness, and there's so much more diversity in the scene than what I was seeing. So I came back to New York, and I was trying to think about what I wanted to do next. I was working at a women's theater company where I was learning how to produce and understand the elements of what it takes to produce art. And I worked under the founder, Julia Miles, there at Women's Project and Productions in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I thought it would be really great to do some poetry, but I wasn't really sure how I was going to do that until 2003, when we went to war in Iraq. There was a Poets Against the War movement happening. And that became an opportunity for me to gather poets on the Lower East Side to speak out against the war. And so I did that, and to my surprise, the poets showed up, people showed up. I was really surprised. And the poets asked me to keep organizing those events, and I thought, well, this is going to be a lot of work, and so I don't know if I can do that. But I decided, I was also an activist at that time, and I thought there really needs to be a space for poetry and activism. And I thought, what if I created that space once a year where we come together as a community to talk about issues happening in our world and how they affect us. And I thought that each year we would focus on a new topic. So for 20 years, I produced annual shows in downtown New York in theaters to give poets an opportunity to talk about the issues of our time. And that includes things like the water crisis, universal health care, pay equity, inequality, a whole range of topics we covered over the 20 years.
Wow, great. So then how did you meet?
I'll let Karla take that one.
Sure. So we met through the Woodhull Institute, the Ethical Leadership Institute. And
What is that?
Oh, well, it is no more,
Oh, okay.
unfortunately. But it was an institute started by Naomi Wolf, and really to train primarily young women in ethical leadership, to give people negotiation skills, to help people with financial literacy, and to bring young women leaders together who might not have even known that they were destined for leadership. And I was invited to come in as faculty. So I met Tara, who was working with the Institute then, and we would have these retreats at this really lovely home upstate New York. And we would come in on a Friday night and we would do some work, we'd have meals. The level of bonding and the level of trust that was available there was absolutely amazing. We taught people public speaking and presentation skills, and really then we traveled around. We went to a number of cities.
We traveled across the country together and trained women in ethical leadership.
Exactly, and that's how we met, and we did work together. It was really great, and we became friends. And how I became involved in the Poetry Project I went to a show at the Bowery Poetry Club, and while I was sitting there, I used to write poetry in college, etc. Then I had kids. So then my creative energy was going somewhere else. I sat in the audience, and during the intermission, I took out some receipts in my pocketbook, and I just started writing a poem. And I shared that with Tara at one point, and then she invited me to come and join and to write, and that's how I became involved. And it's been amazing, just an amazing process.
Yeah, Karla
Yeah.
joined about 10 years ago as a poet, and I think you've been in 9 or 10 shows
Exactly.
since. And I think what I like so much about Karla's story is that for me, the project has always been about community. I mean, I could have chosen to put the pieces on a page and produce a zine once a year, but I wanted to place them in theaters where people had a communal experience, where we came together and we really heard people in community. And I was really intentional about the spaces I was choosing. I chose spaces where we would have more of a theatrical experience. You know, people come in, they get a program, the lights go down, so that poets are respected in the process. People aren't talking through their performances. We're not in a bookstore where people are walking in and out of the scene and could be disruptive. I really wanted to create a space that honored these voices.
Mm-hmm.
And also to pay these poets, an important
Wow.
part of the. So this is really rare. You know, when I was putting this together 20 years ago, I was really borrowing from different things around me, borrowing from the theater world, borrowing from the journalism world. And in journalism, I was freelancing for independent publications like Bust and Bitch and Clamor, which was an activist publication years ago. And I knew that, you know, if I was writing, I could pitch them a story and they would tell me how much I was getting paid, and then I would do the work. And so I extended that commission to the poets. And I would go to them and say, this year we're going to do a show about the global water crisis. And I want you to look into this topic if you don't know about it already. And I'm going to pay you $50 to write a poem. And I would trust that they could come up with something. And this is very challenging for poets. And it's really unheard of in the poetry world. There's this sense you're lucky if you get published, and you're lucky if you get paid. And I really wanted to do something different that honored artists and their voices. And so that's an important piece of the project, and that we've maintained that over the years.
Karla, what was the first theme that you responded to for P3?
Oh my gosh.
Or what's one that you've loved?
Oh, there's so many.
Pick a favorite child.
Where we focused on the wage, right? And I wrote this piece called "Pay Me What You Owe Me," and talked about, you know, time and the, you know, a living wage, etc. I love that. I love that piece.
I laughed
And
because I can hear you say it. Pay me what you owe me.
Exactly. Pay me what don't deduct. So that was one, and then there's one here where I talk about just historical
Let's hold it up
references.
since we have
Yes,
the
we do
camera.
have
Ha ha
cameras.
ha.
These are
For
lovely.
those who are listening only on audio, there is a book being held up. Karla, could you please describe physically what this book looks
The
like?
cover of this book, I love the cover of this book. It is a New York City building with a sheet over the fire escapes that says Poetic People Power. We used to do that on the Lower East Side, right, to hang those sheets over. 3 spoken word shows for social change.
Yeah.
That's the other thing about P3 is that it's art, but it's art really to stimulate people into activism. To people get resources at the ends of shows. People get to really be a part of the audience. I think that's what inspired me so much. Sitting there and listening to other words, it just oh no, I have something to say. And I want to also comment on writing on task on a topic is not easy.
Not easy.
And we have some leeway, right? So that you could, here are some subjects. Think about this. Think about this. Think about that, which is really nice. Yes, and then you choose one, and then I would send an email. Oh, I'm going to work on this, and she would also give us homework. You have to find source material. So it wasn't just that I sat around and mused in my head. No, I had to really do research. So there was a journalistic aspect that, in the long run, I appreciated because then there was a strong foundation for the work. And then you're right, and there's a kind of commitment and dedication that, okay, I agreed to do this. I have to deliver. And what I love about is our collaborative process. So rich that we come together, different poets in a show. There is so much mutual respect and appreciation for everyone's work that encourages us to do our best work. So at a rehearsal early on, we'd read our poems to each other, and people would make such careful, considerate suggestions. So somebody might say, I think it would be much more powerful if you sounded that out as opposed to say what that is. It's like, oh, okay. And nobody has to take these, edits or offerings in, but they really brought us together as poets. So some of that kind of artistic competition, it really doesn't exist at P3.
Yeah.
Nice.
Which I love, yeah.
And I really felt like my role was to support the artists in the level of support that they might want. Some poets don't want a lot of feedback on their pieces. There's only a couple of times where I thought something really wouldn't fit into the show. So part of the shows is that I'll curate the talent, but I'm also curating for a narrative arc. And so what Karla was mentioning is they'll share with me what they're thinking, and I'll make sure, for instance, if we are doing a show, I keep saying the global water crisis because it's easy to talk about in terms of, following here. But if it was a theme like that, I just want to make sure I don't have 7 poems about bottled water. Right? So that we get different angles of an issue, different lenses on the issue, and then I would shape that into a narrative arc for the show. And I think that really then allowed audiences to be informed and really experience the art in an engaging way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you speak about the motivation for producing your first book as an organization?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that. We've been doing this work for 20 years, and I was hoping to publish a book 10 years ago, and it just wasn't landing for people. And in some ways, I think this book is very much of the times, but the work that we were doing was very much before its time. We did a show about global warming before Al Gore's movie came out, An Inconvenient Truth. We did a show about universal health care before Obama was elected. And in some ways, we had to wait a little bit for the rest of the world to really see the value in this work, and we stuck with it. I think it's important to have this book as a historical record, as a document that for 20 years, there's a group of artists who met in downtown New York every year to change the world through poetry. Yeah. And what we have with this book is 3 of those shows. We have 20 shows in total. So we have 3 of those shows in this book anthology. We have a show about environmental heroes called The Eco Rise. We have a show about women's voices called Can You Hear Me Now? And we have a show about human rights abuses happening around the world called While We Were Sleeping.
Ooh.
And, it's interesting when people see the book and they say, this is so powerful. A part of me thinks, that's only 3 of the shows we've done. We have 17 other shows.
I do want to get back to the Women's Voices show specifically for this show.
Yeah.
But Karla, first I'd like to hear what it means to be in this book.
Oh, well, I also had the good fortune to write the forward.
Oh, wow.
So
Busy.
it was an honor And it gave me an opportunity to reflect on how P3 helped me acknowledge myself as a writer and acknowledge myself as a poet. So that felt really important and moving. And, to be in this, my voice has gone out into the world in our shows. And now my voice is going out even further. And I think about the women's voices, right? My piece is called Protest. And it chronicles the protest of a number of women, including myself, starting, at 2, the protest of saying no. And it's one of the poems where I actually use sound effects. So there are sound effects because the narrator is primarily black, me, and so I get to suck my teeth. It's like, they think we stupid. This is a particular kind of protest. So it felt, it's like taking on, it's empowering. Like I can feel ancestral energy when I'm working on a P3 project because those voices that maybe couldn't have spoken are able to speak through me and through some of the other poets. Some of the other work, like you listen to folks like, wow, just, that's so great, that's so powerful, that's so beautiful. This is it's just such an honor. And every time I look at the cover, I just love this book.
Yeah, your eyes are lighting up.
I know. It's like, P3 does that to me. And I think it does it to other people too. People who are in the audience, and I just want to speak about the arc. When we're, really, Tara will be, okay, let's have this one will open the show. Here, we'll go through here, we'll have intermission here, and then this one's going to close the show. And really, you feel the energy, you feel the arc, and the audience moves with the arc, which I think is a great experience for people who come out to hear poets.
And the challenge for me as producer is how can I do that and still be respectful of the artist's time? I was mindful not to create a theater company because I didn't want us to be in a lot of unpaid rehearsals.
Right.
I didn't want to have to pay for set production and things like that. And really, the shows that we have are very movable. We can take them to colleges, we can take them to festivals. They're put together in that way. But really, it allowed me to commission the poets, give them direction on their piece, and then we could put it together very quickly with 1 or 2 rehearsals and then put it on its feet. And I think that what I'm happy about for the book is that our work is now being extended to people outside of New York because, people in New York could experience the shows, and most of the shows were one night only, right? Because that's all I could afford in terms of renting a space. But now people outside of New York can experience the work. And what's been really fun for me within the last week is the book just recently came out, so people are starting to get the book and they're sending in pictures like from California, from Philadelphia, from all these areas, and we've never really had that reach before. So I'm very thankful to Cornerstone Press for, publishing this work.
Yeah, thrilling. Okay, tell me about the Women's Voices show, how you came up with that topic.
Yeah.
Although, come on. How could you not?
Well, interestingly enough, it was actually a commission.
Oh.
I heard this was right before the pandemic, Snug Harbor, which is an art center in Staten Island, they were working on a art show around women's voices to align with the 100th anniversary of women's right to vote at that time in 2020. I believe. I'm trying to think back exactly on the year we did it.
Yeah.
Because we've done so many shows. It's hard to keep them straight. And so they came to us to do a show that would launch the gallery show about women artists. But then the pandemic hit. But so before the pandemic hit, we were commissioned to do this piece. And I was speaking with the woman who commissioned the work, and as soon as I hung up the phone, within 10 minutes, the thing that came into my head was, "Can You Hear Me Now?" And I knew that was the title of the show. And I thought, what if this is a show about how women are heard from the personal writing room to the voting booth? And so I commissioned artists to do poems on particular words: write, speak, sing, advocate, protest, vote, in terms of how we're heard from a private space to a more national space. And each woman poet took a word, and we did a show with that narrative arc.
Huh.
And because it was the pandemic, we actually presented it online over Zoom. And but yeah, we were still able to get the work out into the world.
Yeah. Did you record the show? How did you make it available?
Well, it's live.
Okay.
Right? It's like our in-person shows. They were live, so it
Ah.
was live over Zoom. There is a recording in the sense that for 20 years, I've always documented the shows through film and photos. And we are now in a space where we're working on a documentary about our 20 years of work.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Wow. Karla, tell me your experience about the Women's Voices show. Your poem was the protest poem.
My poem was the protest poem.
Yeah. And what did the show mean to you?
It was so. I recognize how, over the years, women have been silenced. Right? We've been even though we continue to speak, we push against that. That clearly, patriarchy silences us and keeps us down. And for me to write on the word protest,
Yeah.
in terms of protest individually, right? Protest in terms of, people of African descent protesting, that there has been resistance, and that women's resistance is extremely powerful. If you look at a number of strikes around the world, they were not won until women got involved. Because in some instances, the bosses never expected women to be involved if they weren't the workers, right? The laborers. But we resist at the kitchen table. We resist, I teach women's studies and Africana studies, and women resisted the enslavement experience by terminating pregnancies. And I'm like, what wisdom is that to figure out what herbs you can take so that you're not going to bring another life into this kind of horrific oppression. So my poem really gave voice to that, and voice to Ida B. Wells and how she used the written word, which is significant for people of African descent because for so long we were denied the right to be able to read and write, to learn that. So moving through time periods, and that's one of the ways that I write. It's kind of like my signature, right?
Yeah.
I do
Yeah.
this like dating. It's like, okay, this is happening.
She gives us a
now.
historical record.
Right.
Several of her
Ooh.
poems are like that.
Yeah.
It takes you through history.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a here to here to here, so that we can see the arcs, so we can see the continuum of either oppression or the continuum of expression, or how social media, like when the social media we talked about, my poem happened to be on the connection that happens in social media.
Yeah, can I just
Yes, please.
interject? We did a show about social media called Antisocial, the Dark Side of Social Media. Before Cambridge Analytica, before there was really discourse about how social media could affect us. And it was interesting because there wasn't a lot of resources for us really to build the show on. But I had this sense, right, we can't wait for the 10-year analysis on how this is affecting us. We have to gather and figure this out. And so, we learned through that process that there's some rewiring the brain happening here. But that was very early on to get in public and say that. And the other thing about social media that I want to mention in relationship to this project, it may not seem like such a big deal now to give people a space to be heard. But when this project started in 2003, there wasn't social media the way we have it now. And so people couldn't go online and just have a community that they talk to or
Right.
present themselves. The world was very hierarchical. And I did not come from a background where I had access to an Ivy League education, access to money, access to even people in publishing. And so in this very punk rock kind of way, this was my attempt in this underground do-it-yourself way to create a space for people to be heard. And it's just easy to forget that now because we do have many platforms to be heard, but this was really born in a time when there was a much needed space for people who didn't have traditional access to publishing and these spaces to be heard.
On that note, we just have a couple minutes left, but I would like to know how the relationship with Cornerstone happened. If it was a proposal process, if they reached out to you, if it was something else.
Yeah. So I submitted the book, a draft of the manuscript, during an open call. And if I remember correctly, there wasn't a fee, where in most cases there would be a fee. And I think it was the third or fourth submission I made. If people know this in the poetry world, you tend not to have an agent because the books aren't getting sold for enough money for agents to really represent them. But I think it was the third or fourth submission I sent, and we got a green light.
Wow.
And I was thrilled. I was thrilled. And I think there's something culturally happening now, especially with Amanda Gorman's poem at the Biden inauguration. Like, people are interested in spoken word more now than they were even when we were trying to get a book published 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So in many ways, not just in content, but in terms of form, this book seems very much of the moment.
Aw. Any closing thoughts?
I'll let
Anything you
take that
really
one,
want
Heather.
people to know?
I want people to know that tapping into our creative ability makes a difference, that it does change things, that it's a part of social change. Artists often lead the way, and we can all be artists. That's what I want people to know. I want people to write, even if they think that, oh, I'm not a poet. I can just write, put your words together, play with those, and, you know, at the end of our shows, what art will you make? What action will you take? Right? It's like,
Ooh.
okay, let's see that we all have a voice, and we can use our voices equitably. We don't have to drown each other out.
Yeah. Well, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much. You've been watching Badass Lady Folk. I'm your host, Christine Stoddard. I'm honored to have P3 on the episode. This time, check out the book. Do it. It's online. You'll find it. Yay! Until next time.